So as you can tell, I'm not from around here. I've been living in Portland for 3 years. Originally, I'm from the UK. I come from a family of itinerant vagabonds, I could say is the best description. And the first story I'd like to share with you about my journey as an entrepreneur relates to my great-grandfather, who went by the name, the rather grand name of Sir Philip Le Sueur. And just before World War I, he was sent out to the Far East to run a family rubber plantation in Malaya. Malaysia, as it's called now. And then World War I kicked off, and it was very hard to get back. All the ships were at risk of being torpedoed, and one thing after another happened that kept him in Malaysia. And then the war ended, and he's expected to come home, and then we got the bad news, that he died of the Spanish flu. And I'm not sure if any of you paid attention at school of history, I certainly didn't, but apparently as many people died of the flu as of World War I. Now, it was the dirty secret in our family that he never got the flu. That in the 5 years he'd been away, he'd found someone else in the Far East, and this was the story he told everyone about why he hadn't come back. And you kind of got to a certain age in our family and you were told this story, and it was all told in hushed tones, and the dark secret, don't tell anybody. You'll keep it between us, right? And I remember thinking two things. I remember thinking, he went all that way, and he got to run his own thing, and I completely missed the moral of the story. But you know, as a young guy, I got that wanderlust in me, and about half of our family are like that. My nephew lives in New York. My aunt, who introduced me to computers, she was in the Kenyan Colonial Service for 25 years, and so forth and so on. So it's no surprise I've ended up here. So I formed my first business when I was 15. I got a scholarship to go to a boarding school. That meant I had a lot of free time on my hands in the summer when all my friends were still in school and I was at home. And I wrote computer games, and I had soon had enough business to form a company. And that led me to fall out with my father. He didn't like me having that measure of independence. If any of you have got 15-year-old sons, you'll know just how polite, diplomatic, and non-arrogant I was about my newfound power. So I found myself at 16 with a year of high school to go and still doing my job. I graduated at 17. There's a great line. I'm not sure if you've heard of this little cartoon called The Simpsons. I hear it's, someone around here has something to do with it. There's a line where he's doing really well, and Marge is saying, why don't you save a bit for a rainy day? And he says, there ain't going to be a rainy day, Marge. And I'm like, why go to university? It was just much more fun that summer to keep writing games and keep running your business. Well, inevitably, it ended in tears. I remember my mother's birthday, May 31st, 1991. I come to my office, and it's empty. And one of my staff has stolen everything in the office. Every last bit. It's a long story, but the basic fault was mine, an error of judgment. I should have fired him 3 months sooner. So it's the middle of a recession that you call the Depression, the 2009 Depression. Well, in the UK, we had something very similar in 91. 1 in 25 houses in negative equity. We'd had 17% interest rates. It was a real bad situation. And I'm 19 with no education and $300,000 in debt. And it took me 2 years to work my way out of that. It was a very hard time. And I remember having dinner with my girlfriend. We couldn't live together. We couldn't live in the same city. We had to meet each other at weekends in London because we couldn't afford to live there. And we couldn't pay the restaurant bill. And I thought I had £20. The bill was 15. I had 10. And she's like, well, we've got to leave the 10. And I'm like, no way. If we're going to hoof it, we're going to hoof it. And I think I paid them back eventually. But anyway, the point is that 9 months later, I had paid everything off. I had a great job. And I went past that restaurant on the way to my apartment. And it gave me a lot of strength in my career, that how quickly things can get better, and how much you can face the worst situation. I also remember joking at that time, thank God I wasn't 40 with children and a mortgage doing this. But I forgot about that when I came here. So that was a real knockback for me. And I spent the next 10 years working for some big companies on real fun work, learned a lot. But I couldn't help but return to my entrepreneurial roots. And so in 2000, when the bubble popped, I took the opportunity to join British Telecom and turn around two of their 150 plus broken startups. And that led to the next 10 years as a startup executive. And I always hankered after doing my own company again, but I was literally too scared to do it. And we sold one company, and in England, you don't have a non-compete, you have something called garden leave, where you're paid to go gardening. Seriously, it's literally in the contract, it says clause 7, garden leave. So we sold one company, and I was paid not to work for 6 months, and I decided to go fishing. So I flew to Idaho to do fly fishing, it's one of my passions. And the next day I went to the rodeo in St. Paul, which is where I met my wife. Which I suppose on balance was a good thing, but it did ruin a whole summer of fishing. So we ended up in Kansas City working for another startup. It was a really interesting play. They had a lot of data. Unfortunately, their ops team couldn't keep up with the flow of data. In fact, one of them moved to Africa without telling us. He met a girl on the internet in Egypt and went to see her and stayed, and we only found out when we really, really needed him here. And in desperation, we turned to the cloud as a way of dealing with our business. It was a life or death. In those days, this was a really risky decision. But fortunately, it taught me a lot about the cloud. And after 2 years in Kansas City, my wife wasn't settling. She's originally from China, from Vietnam, and being in Kansas City at that time was rather like walking around with a Carmen Miranda hat on. It was very hard for her. So she wanted to come back to Portland, to be near family, to be in an environment she was comfortable with. And so in the middle of the Depression, I quit my job and came to Portland. And there's no jobs here at the time. It was really hard. So I decided to do my startup. And instead of going all in on one idea, I was doing the idea to do 2 or 3 ideas a quarter. I can code very badly, but I can still code, and it was enough to get the concepts going. But about 2 months in, I was rushed to hospital with a massive internal infection, emergency surgery that afternoon, and I spent the next 5.5 months on my back. So with the rent money running out, and with not really sure I could even get a permanent job if I needed to go find one, I still didn't want to write to my friends and say, I need a job. So I wrote to them saying, I need a reference. And a few of them wrote to me saying, oh, can you in market? Can we work with you? And that's where I started my career as a cloud consultant. And I got all my friends on the cloud who needed it. They paid me well and quickly, which is very helpful. And they had one problem. So the cloud is a major change in how you buy computers. Imagine if you have your cell phone, you've had overages. Now imagine if you had your iPad and you're paying by the minute. And if you used your iPad a lot this weekend, you got a large bill. Well, companies are facing that challenge today, and so had all of my customers. And they're my friends, so they're constantly asking me, how much are we paying, and why have we got this big bill? So I wrote Cloudability as a way of sending them the bill every day, just to get them off my back. It wasn't one of my startups. I went back to my other projects that I was trying to get off the ground, and it did the problem. It fixed the problem. No one called me again for a few months, and then it broke. And they started calling again, saying, can you fix this? It's really important. Well, it was free. I was busy. I didn't get around to fixing it. And by the end of the month, all of their bosses had called me. Some of them, all of them emotional, some of them threatening to sue me. I'm sure it's in your contract that you have to give us this service. And that's when I understood that Cloudability was the idea I've been looking for. It was in front of me all the time. There was one small problem. We had another baby on the way. So I waited a few months, but the pressure was building. Everyone I talked to about the idea was very, very encouraging. I have a lot of ideas. Eccentric is, I think, the best label for them. And so I test them out with a wide network of advisors. And I encourage anyone who's thinking, toying with going it alone. I remember it was Lisa talking about all of the advice she had. You have to have that network. And when most of them are saying, you've got to do this, it's a really solid signal. So Freya, my third child, came in January of 2011. And then we had the small problem that my co-founder, JR, he had twins due in March. So we dabbled, we put up a web page to see who would be interested in this, and we got 800 users on the first day. And so as soon as he came back from the hospital, I turned up at his house with a bottle of champagne on the pretenses of congratulating him and made him sign up there and then. And Cloudability was formed on April 5th, 2011. To whiz through the next 2 years, just for the context of those who are thinking about doing something similar, at the time it was very, very hard to raise money in Portland, period. And we'd all lived in California for one time or the other, so we told our spouses that we're going to have to move to California. We would hold it off for as long as we could. And then we talked to our friends and family and our lawyers and our advisors and their friends and family and their lawyers and advisors. And we did what's called an open round. So what we did was we did a promissory notes. It's a debt vehicle where you borrow money that can convert into stock at a prefixed valuation. And we did it in an open round, which meant that I could pull down $25,000 every so often whenever I needed it. And before I knew it, we'd raised $200,000. We'd launched a product. We had $20 or $30 million of bills in the system. We managed that by cost. So it was a lot of money. A lot of people were using it. And we went on to raise another $1 million. And then we went to an accelerator. Now, we've been in PI, the Portland Incubator Experiment. It's been a great experience for us here in the city. And that led us to go to Techstars. Techstars is the premier accelerator on the planet. And 30 days after we finished Techstars, we closed the Series A for $8.7 million. This is with no customers, no paying customers, just traction, buzz, and a product. And so 1 year after that, here we are in Portland. We have 23 staff, 19 of them in Portland. We'll probably be at 40 staff by the end of the year. We're now managing $500 million of spending. Our customers are typically spending about $1,000 a minute on the cloud, and we're helping them do that right. And we found Portland to be a uniquely special place to do this. I've worked all over the world. I've worked in the Valley. I've worked in New York and in Texas. There's nowhere that has such a supportive environment for entrepreneurs. Sometimes it really feels like the whole city is cheering us on. So, we're uniquely positioned, I think, to become the market leader in our segment. And I look forward maybe to coming back next year or 2 years' time to tell you how it's going.